Well, tonight I'm in Windsor, Ontario, so we're doing another talk via video. We've been talking over the last few weeks about painful emotions, and I've been talking about specific emotions that are painful, like guilt and stress and sitting in this waiting period. Tonight and next week, I want to talk about emotions in general, because I have learned over the last 15 years that most people in recovery need to do some really important thinking about emotions and learn how to manage their emotions. So tonight it's going to be an overview of how complex trauma affects our emotions. And then next week I want to look at healthy tools for managing our emotions. So the first thing that I want people to be aware of is that in recovery you might hear that your triggers are people, places, and things. What I want you to realize is that people, places, and things trigger an emotion. And it's the emotion that causes you to go into fight, flight, freeze, or to relapse. And so emotions become a big part of a relapse pattern in people, and that's why it becomes so important to understand what's happening below the surface in you in recovery. The second thing that I want people to understand is that for many people, growing up in complex trauma, they learn to see emotions as bad things. So if they cried, they got punished or made fun of. If they showed fear, they got punished or made fun of. If they were angry, they got punished. And so they began to see all emotions are bad. They make you vulnerable to getting picked on. They make you weak. And so the approach of complex trauma was you can't resolve any of those emotions. If you see something that makes you angry because it's unloving, you can't fix that. And so your only option with unresolved painful emotions was to stuff them, shut them down, freeze. And that's what many people do. But what they're not aware of is that even though they've stuffed the emotions down, those emotions still affect them and basically run their life. Fear is driving them at a subconscious level. And so until you understand and become aware of your emotions, you are being controlled by them, but you're also in great danger because of that. So one of the things that I do with clients at React is to get them to answer two questions. The first is this: at which age did you begin shutting down your emotions? So some people might say, when I was 10, I can remember saying I'm never going to be angry again and shutting that down. Or when I was 8, I remember saying I'm never going to cry again. And over a period of years, they shut down different emotions that they saw as being weak or making them vulnerable and therefore bad. The second question: what are the 5 emotions that cause you the greatest trouble today, that you struggle with the most? So if you want to do those 2 questions, that can be a very helpful thing for you. But what I want to do right now is just to take you to some basic questions. Number 1, what is the purpose of emotions? For many people in complex trauma, they don't like emotions. They say, emotions complicate my life. I'd rather be an emotionless creature. So we need to figure out, why do we have emotions? What is the value of having emotions? So the first thing that a word picture is, see your emotions like a dashboard on a car. And every little light that comes up on your dashboard is like a different emotion. And so emotions are placed in us to alert us to what's happening inside of us and what's happening outside of us. And so if we're in a situation that is dangerous or not healthy, our emotions flash on the dashboard saying, alert, alert, pay attention, something's going on here that you need to be aware of. And that is their main purpose, to alert us to stuff going on. Then you get to negative emotions and positive emotions. And to appreciate it, every emotion that I feel creates a pull in me as to how it wants me to react. So if I am feeling fear, the pull is run away, fight or flight or freeze. If I'm feeling depressed, I feel a pull to isolate, to not be motivated. So they create a pull on me. So negative emotions design was saying something in your environment is either unloving or unsafe. And those negative emotions are supposed to be painful enough that they motivate me to want to make whatever is happening safe or loving again. So it gives me the incentive and the energy to correct an unsafe or an unloving circumstance and make it healthy again. That's the original design. And then positive emotions, they're designed to reinforce that I'm living in a healthy way. And it gives me a positive consequence that feels good. And so the brain says, I want to repeat that. Then it also adds richness to life. So now when we see beauty, we feel pleasure. When we connect with people in healthy ways, we feel pleasure. And it makes those behaviors not just pleasurable, but it fills our life with positive things. So those emotions were all designed to help us. But now we come to complex trauma. And what complex trauma does, big picture, is take a very good system and change it and make it an unhealthy system. So part of what I'm going to share with you now, for many of you, will be somewhat painful when you begin to realize how complex trauma has affected your emotional world. The first thing I want you to realize is complex trauma causes the emotional world of a child to be mainly negative emotions. So on the graph, the top line is of a healthy child, and you see the plus sign, that's mainly positive emotions. A child in a healthy home will experience pain, but they can quickly fix the problem and the pain goes away. And so they live most of the time feeling positive emotions. But a child in complex trauma, they are feeling pain, anger, sadness, and they can't fix it. And so they just sit in these unpleasant, painful emotions with no solution. So the majority of their emotional world is negative emotions. And that is what is sad. Now, the second thing that happens is, if there's no solution to a negative emotion, it no longer pulls me towards a positive solution. It now begins to pull me towards self-destructive behaviors. So if I'm angry, I want to hurt myself, I want to hurt others, I want to lash out, I want to isolate. If I'm depressed and there's no solution for that, I just want to isolate. I don't want to try anything. So the pull of emotions now changes from taking me to a positive solution to taking me to a self-destructive place that only makes things worse. And then most people in dysfunctional or complex trauma families only ever experience 3 emotions: mad, sad, and glad. And usually, mom or dad was allowed to be mad, mom or dad was allowed to be sad, but the children had to be glad. So you were restricted to stuffing every emotion and wearing a mask that was happy all the time. And so your emotional world became very small as far as what you could express, but very big as far as what you stuffed. Then the fourth thing around complex trauma is this. If you look at the graph, you got the blue circle where you got trauma or pain or problems. And so if you go into that without a solution, you feel pain, and then you try to fix it, but you can't fix it, so you feel more pain. And so the only response is fight, flight, or freeze. What happens with that is, because pain is so painful within complex trauma, you now create cortisol in the brain, which creates an intense trigger to fight, flight, freeze. And that usually includes intense emotional escalation and intense emotions. And so we call that the startle response. So you feel pain, and it's just like a cat that you surprise. You just jump in a startle response, and you go in a nanosecond from 0 to 100, and that usually includes anger or some other emotion. So the startle response is there. Then you back that up, and your brain says, I don't want to just go through pain. Now, I am going to fight, flight, or freeze whenever I am in uncomfortable emotions. And so we call that distress intolerance. You can't tolerate any stressful, uncomfortable situations. So your brain is saying, if I sit in uncomfortable emotions, I will end up getting hurt. So now I am going to fight, flight, freeze in any uncomfortable emotion. I can't sit in any of that. And then your brain backs it up even more. Why wait till we're in uncomfortable emotions? And you develop what we call hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is, I am going to always be looking for danger. And what you begin to do is you only see negative. And that actually sets you up to be negative in your thinking and to have painful emotions as part of that. And so the technical term for complex trauma is it results in emotional dysregulation. You're not able to regulate your emotions. You get triggered and you go 0 to 100. All of that happens inside of you. And so you think you've got your emotions under control and all stuffed down, but then you get triggered. And that usually happens in an intimate relationship. And then all of the other stuff, your emotions take over. The next thing that happens in complex trauma is that the more intense the pain of your life was as a child, the more intense the negative emotions are that you live with. And so you will have more anger than most. You will have more shame than most, more depression, and more anxiety and fear. So the greater the complex trauma, the greater the negative effect on your emotional world, and you have more negative emotions and more intense negative emotions. And then we've talked about complex trauma basically is living with unresolved, painful emotions. You can't find a solution. So part of freezing, which was the only option for the child, is you can go a bunch of different directions. You can say, number one, don't care about anything. If you don't care about anything, then it doesn't hurt when it gets taken away from you. Others, they just disconnect from life. They dissociate. They can go into a fantasy world. They can go almost to a sitting on the ceiling, watching their life type of dissociation. Others, they go into this great make-believe world where everything is perfect. Others medicate it by just being internally angry at themselves, hurting themselves. Others just use distractions so they don't have to feel, just stay busy doing stuff. And then once you find drugs or alcohol, you say, I've found the perfect way to not feel. And so one of the reasons for people getting into drugs and becoming addicts was it became a way to deal with their emotions that they couldn't resolve any other way. And so recovery is going to be about necessarily learning how to deal with my emotions in a happy way or in a healthy way. The next thing is complex trauma results in messing up how I do relationships. And so now you come to codependency. And what codependency says is I can't be happy unless you are happy. So my emotional state depends on you. So if you're angry, then I'm full of fear and I'm running around trying to take your anger away. If you're sad, then I'm all upset and I wonder what I've done wrong, and I can't be happy till you're out of your depression. So my emotional world depends on yours. And what tends to happen is you're attracted to people who are not emotionally available, people who are angry, and so you're never in a positive place emotionally because you're always worried about them. The other thing that comes out of codependency is, as a child, you become more aware of the emotions of others than you are aware of your own emotions. So you know who's angry in the crowd, you know who's happy, and so your radar is tuned into everybody else's emotion, but you're totally oblivious to your own emotional state. The next thing is that complex trauma creates an emotional default setting. And what I mean by that is your autopilot. So if you're not working on yourself in any way, where do you gravitate towards emotionally? Where do you end up? And so a lot of people, if they're not working on themselves, they end up discontent. They end up very negative. They end up very angry. They end up depressed, full of all kinds of negative doubts, hopelessness, all of that kind of stuff. Where do you gravitate towards emotionally when you're not working on yourself? And sadly, complex trauma creates a default setting that is negative emotions. Anxiety, fear, depression, anger, hopelessness, that becomes your default autopilot. And that is scary because it makes you very vulnerable to bad decisions. Then, for many people, complex trauma is all about keeping you stuck in the limbic brain, your emotion center. So your limbic brain is your emotion center. It's all about survival. And so you make decisions based on how you're feeling and whether it'll keep you safe in the short term or make you happy in the short term. You don't think far in advance. And so when you are in a negative emotional place, you're in your limbic brain, and that usually results, for complex trauma people, in making bad decisions, which is a scary thing. One of the sad things to me about complex trauma is this. It doesn't just create lots of negative emotions as your default setting, but it also begins to make even positive emotions a dangerous thing. I talk to many addicts who tell me that when they're feeling happy, they're in danger. Because when they're feeling happy, they go in a bunch of different directions. They either go, I can't trust this, something bad's about to happen, the other shoe's going to drop, it always has. Or I'm in this happy mode, so let's party, and it triggers a relapse. Or I'm in this happy mode, and I should sabotage. So even positive emotions become dangerous things for people with complex trauma. The next thing that I want you to be aware of is there were emotions that were generated in complex trauma in times of extreme crisis or chaos. Then you got the adrenaline pumping. And then you felt intense feelings. And that was basically your emotional world coming out of intensity around crisis or chaos. And so what you have to be prepared for as you get into recovery is, now I'm going to go into recovery and I'm going to start getting healthier, and all of a sudden I'm not going to have as much chaos in my life, as many crises in my life. Oops, that feels boring. And your brain goes, I don't like boring, I need intensity to feel alive. And so the temptation will be to sabotage and create drama or chaos or a crisis. One of the things that's very important for people in recovery to understand is this. Emotions use a lot of energy. So I talk to clients about having a gas tank, an emotional gas tank with gasoline. When you are angry, when you are depressed, when you're full of stress, it sucks up a lot of gas. And it leaves you emotionally exhausted, but that also leaves you physically tired. So your emotions affects your physical world, your body. So if you're sad, you cry. If you're angry, your pulse, it increases. You start to sweat. You shake a little bit. If you're full of fear, you feel it in your stomach and you shake a little bit. All of that takes emotional and physical energy. So most people in recovery, once they begin to deal with their emotions, they find themselves really tired. I can count on the fact on most weeks at React, by Wednesday, clients will be exhausted if we've had a very emotionally demanding topic. And if it's stirred up a lot of emotional stuff, They will be really tired physically and emotionally. So, be aware of that. Next thing I want you to understand is this. In complex trauma, people never learned how to take care of themselves emotionally. So I have a little diagram that I want you to look at, and that will help you maybe see that. So on the right, you see a green performance zone. This is the healthy. And what the performance zone is a healthy person who is serving, doing their job, output energy to work to help others. But then under that, you have a recovery zone. So they balance their life between work and rest. They give and then they take time to recharge their batteries. And they develop a rhythm to their life that enables them to do that and continuing to do that for years and years. But on the left, you have complex trauma. And so what happens in complex trauma is you're in survival mode. And you can't take a rest because you got to be alert to danger all the time. And so what you do is you push yourself till you burn out and then you crash. And that's the burnout zone. Now, why I want you to think about that is this. Many people in recovery haven't learned the right side, which is starting to take care of themselves physically, emotionally, spiritually, output, followed by self-care. They're still in survival mode, even in recovery. And so what they'll do in recovery is they'll push themselves, not take care of themselves, and then they'll get so exhausted, they'll burn out, and then they relapse. Some get so burnt out, they say, I need a holiday, and the only holiday they know of is a relapse. And so if you are going to make it in recovery, you got to get out of the survival zone side. And you have to begin to learn how to give and then take care of yourself. That becomes absolutely essential if you're going to make it in recovery. So for tonight, I got thinking about what does the Bible teach about emotions? And so tonight and next week, I want to really look at what does the Bible tell us about emotions. And part of the reason I want to do that is because I'm concerned that for many people that go to church, they've been given a lot of misinformation about emotions and what the Bible said. And what they're led to believe that if they just trust God or they read their Bible and pray every day, that God has somehow promised to make their life easy and without difficulty or without pain. And so that sets a lot of people up to think they must not be doing the Christian life properly because they're struggling or they're having painful emotions. And then the second thing is that there's a lot of commands in the Bible about how we should act, about the attitudes we should have. And a lot of that has been mistaught to people about what their emotional world should be like. But I do want you to realize is that it kind of makes my heart sad and heavy to see the amount of damage that has been done to a lot of people, especially with mental health issues, who have gone to church and been made to feel that they're bad Christians because they struggle with depression or anxiety. So hopefully I can speak to some of that tonight and help you to understand it better, and then next week to just fill it out even more. So Philippians 4 is the chapter of the Bible where a lot of the commands come out of that affect our emotional world and what we've been led to believe our emotional world should be like. So verse 4 says this, always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. And so some of you may have heard that if you went to church as a child. And basically what that was interpreted to say is you should be happy all the time. If you have anxiety or depression, then you're disobeying that. You're sinning against God. And to me that is so sad because that's not what that verse is saying. Complex trauma, you were taught to be happy all the time, and that became your mask. And for many people coming into churches where you see Christians, everybody's smiling, you say, this doesn't feel real. This feels like my sick family growing up. And what the Bible is very clear about is this. It wants us to experience all the emotions, positive and negative. And we will experience all the emotions as we go through life. But what this verse is saying is even if I'm depressed, even if I'm angry, even if I'm a little full of some anxiety about my future, I can feel those and be honest about that. But those don't have to be the dominating emotions. Above that, I can still choose to trust God, and there will be a peace in the middle of all the other emotions. And so it is not saying be a one emotion person. It is saying feel all the emotions, but still trust God in the midst and find His joy somehow in the middle of that pain. The second one is in verse 6 and 7. It says, don't worry or don't have anxiety about anything. Instead, pray about everything, tell God what you need, and thank Him for all He has done. Then you will experience God's peace, which exceeds anything we can understand. Many people have been made to feel bad Christian for taking anxiety medication. And they've been told you're not trusting God, you're disobeying God. I think it's important to make a distinction that there are two types of anxiety. So the first one is the worry part. And the worry part is, I'm not trusting God. I want to be in control and have everything nailed down. And if I don't, I'm going to worry all the time. That's what this verse is talking about. The second type of anxiety is just a chemical imbalance or just natural nervousness. So you're going to public speak for the first time. You feel nervous. It's not condemning that kind of anxiety. It's condemning the lack of trust, worry. But a lot of people have been made to feel they're very bad Christians if they have any type of anxiety. The other thing with this is a lot of people have been made to feel that they should never experience negative emotions. They should never have to sit in a negative emotion. That if you just pray, it's kind of like a magic wand that makes all negative emotions go away. And what we're going to see next week is that there are times where prayer doesn't just make emotions go away. There are times where God asks us to sit in uncomfortable emotions. Next one, verse 13. I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. I have seen this one so misinterpreted for people in recovery, and it goes like this. I don't need to go to a meeting. I don't need to work on myself. I don't need to understand recovery and addiction and complex trauma. I just need to trust God and it'll make recovery easy. I can do it through Christ. And what it presents is if I'm trusting God, I can be passive. And God will just take over like a puppeteer with a puppet, and He will just do everything for me and make it so I don't have a craving and I never relapse. What Paul said in another part is this. I work with all the energy I have that I trust God to give me. And what he is saying is, it's not me being totally passive. It's me working 100% and trusting God to provide 100%. And we can't quite understand how God can work 100%. We work 100%, but we need to give it all we have. So one way, just to help you kind of see flaws in that interpretation, when people say to me, I can do all things through Christ that strengthen me, I say, can you, for the rest of your life, never sleep? And just say, oh, God's going to strengthen me. He's promised to. No, you go, that doesn't make sense. Okay, how about if you never eat again? Can you still do everything through Christ? No, you can't. And so what you realize is I can do everything through Christ as I'm fulfilling my responsibilities to take care of myself, to say no to things I need to say no to, then I'm able to do what He wants me to do, because then He'll give me the strength to do that. But I got to take care of myself. The next one goes with that, verse 19. My God will supply all your needs. In other words, people say, I don't have to take care of myself. I don't have to sleep that much. God will just provide my needs. I can go waste my money and God will somehow make sure there's food on the table. And I go, no. Part of what you're going to see in the Bible is you're going to see some people where God didn't provide them food and they starved to death. Or other people who were ill and they wanted to be there for their kids, but they weren't able to, and God didn't just magically make it possible for them to be there for their kids. So what we come down to is this. God will provide my needs when I'm doing and being where God wants me to be. And sometime in His wisdom, He allows us to be in a place where we can't do what we want to do. And we have to trust His wisdom in those places. What I hope you're seeing is this. God has promised a lot of things to us, but we have to be following Him and doing what He wants us to do. We have to be doing our part and not just expecting God to make up for our laziness or stupidity. We have to work in cooperation with God and accept His plan. That is such an essential part of what His fulfillment of His promises is all about. Now I want to take you to Isaiah. And this promise you probably have heard. It's been made into songs, but it usually gets misinterpreted. So it's Isaiah 40:31. Even youths will become weak and tired. So who has the most energy in the world? Young people. But even they get tired. And young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like an eagle. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Now in the Hebrew language, that is known as a triplet. Fly on the wings as an eagle, run and not grow weary, walk and not faint. 3 things back to back. In the English language, we would say that it goes from the greatest, flying like an eagle, to the least, walking and not get faint. And so what we'd say is fly like an eagle. That's the way God wants us to be. That's the greatest expression of God's power. That's what He wants to do to make our norm that we fly like an eagle all the time. Then if we're not there all the time, then at least we should run and not grow weary. And we know God's strength so we can run and run and run. And then for the basket case Christians who haven't got it figured out very well, they're just going to kind of walk and not faint. That's kind of how it gets presented. Do you realize that the Hebrew is the exact opposite? It goes from the least to the greatest. And what it says is this. Flying like an eagle, that's what God doesn't do very often. That's not the greatest demonstration of His power. So that's not the norm. Running like a youth and not growing weary, God does that more often, but it's still not the norm, and it's not the greatest expression of His power. What is the norm and what is the greatest expression of His power? Walking and not growing faint. In other words, the norm for us is to put one foot in front of another, get up every morning, do what we need to do, fulfill our responsibilities. That's normal life. That's what God required. Once in a while, He lets us fly like an eagle, but it's day after day doing work. Day after day caring for children. Day after day living within the limitations of a human body. That's the norm. And the greatest demonstration of God's power is when He gives us the strength to keep going when we want to give up. I have many days where I say, God, I don't feel I can do this, but I'm going to put this foot in front of the other, And if you don't show up and give me the strength to take the next step, I'm in big trouble. And what I find is if I'm doing what He wants me to do, I put that foot in front of the other, and there's strength to do it. Then I put the other foot in front of the other, and there's strength there. And I get to the end of the day, and I go, thank you, God. I didn't know where the power was going to come from to get through today, but you showed up. And that's the way it's designed to be. Now, there's a couple other promises that I have loved and have meant a lot to me. Of Isaiah 41:10. And it says, don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you up with my victorious hand. Two word pictures come to my mind in light of that. Number one is day one for a child in kindergarten. And they're all nervous and they're afraid because they've never been there before and they don't know if they're going to have any friends. And so what calms their fear? It's when you take their hand and you walk with them to school. And you walk with them to see their classroom. The fact that you're with them calms their fears. And what God is saying when we're facing difficult times is, yes, I get it, you're afraid, but I'm with you, and I will help you. And then the second picture is of walking with a child on ice. And their feet are slipping and sliding, and you grab them by the hand and you hold them up. And you get to the other side of the ice. They don't go, Dad, wasn't I impressive? They go, Dad, thanks for holding my hand and keeping me up. And I have faced many situations in my life where I'm slipping and sliding and I'm falling, and God somehow gets me through it and keeps me up. And that's what God has promised. Now, the next one brings a balance to that, so we don't take that first one too far. A couple chapters later, it says this: don't be afraid, for I have ransomed or bought you. I have brought you into my family, is what it's saying. I have called you by my name. You're mine. So you're now in a relationship with me. Your family. And how do I treat family? When you go through deep waters, I will be with you. Let me stop right there. Notice he doesn't say, now that you're in my family, you'll never go through deep water again. Life will be easy. No, he says you're in my family and you're still going to go through deep waters. And then it says when you go through rivers of difficulty, you will not drown. So here's how I picture it. He doesn't say you're going to go into the shallow end. He said you're going to go through deep water. So I picture water kind of right up to my nose. And you just got your nose above the water breathing. And you're panicking a little bit because you're afraid it's going to overtake you and you're going to drown. And God is saying, I won't let it overtake you. You won't drown. You're going to go through deep water. And that means difficult times. Times when you feel it's too much. Times when you feel it's going to overwhelm you. And God says, I'll help you then. I won't make it magically go away. I'll walk with you through it. Then he says, when you walk through the fire of oppression. Again, he didn't say you're never going to walk through fire again. He says, no, you're still going to have fire. And you're going to have hot times where you're feeling like this is too hot for me to take. This is too difficult. I feel like I'm going to burn up. And what does he say? You will not be burned up. The flames will not consume you. So what does God promise us? Life will be one foot in front of the other day by day. It'll be work. It'll be routine. At times, difficult routine, responsibilities. You're going to go through deep water and fire. You're going to have hard times. But as you're doing that, if you're surrendered to me and trusting me, I will give you the strength you need to get through. I will hold you up. I will hold you by your hand. I will help you. All of that will be important. And then there's one final promise that I love so much in 2 Corinthians 12. Paul says this, though I received such wonderful revelations from God. So Paul had these amazing experiences where we're told he was actually taken to heaven and then brought back down. So he got to see heaven when nobody else around him had ever experienced that. So just imagine, what would it be like if God took you to see heaven and then brought you back here next Friday night? You'd be walking around with a big head saying, hey, I'm better than everybody here because God took me to heaven. I must be special. And so God knew that Paul's experience had the potential to make him a very proud man. So what can God do to keep Paul humble? Because Paul's only going to be effective if he remains a humble servant. So here's what happened. God, to keep me from becoming proud, has given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. 3 different times I begged the Lord, take it away. We're never told what that thorn was. But a thorn in the flesh, if you've ever had a sliver, it's painful. It's there all the time. It's irritating. And Paul didn't like the pain. So it was something in his life that caused him daily pain, and it restricted him because of that pain. It made him weaker. And he didn't like the pain or feeling weak. And so 3 times he said, God, take it away. And what did God do? Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. In other words, Paul, if you didn't have this pain that made you weak, and you felt strong all the time, you would be taking credit for the successes that happen because of what you're doing. I wouldn't get any glory. I wouldn't get any applause. People wouldn't see me. But when you're really weak, and then I work great power through you, people go, that can't be Paul, that's got to be God. And so all of a sudden, people aren't noticing you, Paul. They're getting their attention drawn to the beauty of God. And that's what I want. Because it's only through a relationship with me that they will find peace and happiness. So in order for that to happen, Paul, I got to keep you weak. And I can show my power through your weakness in a great way. And so, now he says this. Now I am glad to boast about my weakness, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weakness and in the hardships and persecutions that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So what he's saying is 2 things. When I'm weak, I depend on God to give me strength, and He lets me put one foot in front of the other. He gives me His strength to get through the day. I'm strong because of His strength. And number 2, when I'm weak, He can work powerfully through me to touch a lot of lives that I wouldn't have been able to touch if I was strong in myself. So Paul says, I've learned to be thankful for the weaknesses of my life, for pain, for limitations, for things that I wish I didn't have because I feel they make me weak. Because then people will notice God through me, and God can work through me in a greater way. So what is God's norm? He wants us to take care of ourselves. But God is really saying every Christian, every follower of God is going to have a weakness that they have to deal with in an ongoing daily way that is a frustration to them. They don't want it. It complicates their life. It makes their life harder. They wish they could get rid of it. But God says, no, that's going to be your norm, because that'll keep driving you to depend on me, to trust me, and to be useful to me in a greater way. I hope that just gives you a perspective from the Bible on what norm is emotionally, circumstantially, for those who follow God. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you are wise. If we were just left to do what we thought was best for ourselves, we'd probably destroy our lives and mess them up and make them totally ineffective. And thank you for what, in your wisdom, you have done just to keep us close to you, to keep us useful, and to keep us growing. Amen.